Our view was retail banks, again, they have to exist for the economies to exist. So therefore, what is the best retail bank? The best retail bank is the one which has mostly home loans, mostly credit cards, mostly those sort of loans, which are simple, indivisible. So the losses are much more easy to track on a historical basis. And then also the highest deposit base. Deposit base basically means stability of funding, lower cost of funding, so i.e. their returns would be higher. And we identified Wells Fargo as the best of that in the US. And if you look at pretty much by any metric, Wells Fargo is one of the highest net interest margins, has the lowest credit costs, highest deposit funding, all those factors put in, and one of the highest capital levels. Put all those factors put in, we saw that as ultimately the beneficiary from the crisis in the US, because they would be best capitalized when others weren't, and they would be able to provide loans when others couldn't. And they were also able to buy up other banks, so therefore we identified that as an opportunity.
And how did the Aussie banks stack up in this space?
The Aussie banks versus the US banks, it's slightly different. The Aussie banks are in a different phase of their of the economy. The Aussie banks have substantially higher risk in terms of earnings, we think, compared to the US banks. The reason why that is the credit cost for the Australian banks, which is one of the primary drivers of what happens to earnings, is at historical lows. Someone like CBA's his credit cost is 16 basis points, versus their average historically around 30. You look at the US banks and even the Europeans, they're pretty much close to, if not higher, or just below their historical averages. So the risk there is that you stay at those levels. Where the risk for the Australian banks is that credit costs go up, which means that there's pressure on your earnings. In order to offset that pressure, banks have to decrease their cost-to-income ratios and other. But our net view is that there's more earnings risk in the Australian banks than the European or the US banks, and that's why we're not invested in the Australian banks.